Here is 9 lessons that you learn from traveling and why you should start working towards booking that next trip. Hello and welcome back to Mental and Emotional Fitness. If you're new here, my name is Chidom Pofu. I'm your personal emotional intelligence detective, and welcome to the Fit with Chido family, where we go beyond physical fitness, striving for mental and emotional fitness. Today, we're going to be talking about travel, the things you learn about yourself, the things you learn about the world, and about other people. It doesn't matter what type of a traveler you are, whether you're traveling for work, whether you're traveling for vacation, or you're moving to a completely new country, new continent. These are things that you will learn. And if you haven't traveled a lot, it's good for you to put that on your bucket list, to travel to other continents, experience other cultures. It's beyond learning about history of places, learning about traditions, sitting by the beach. There's some important life lessons that only come when you travel or when you're in a situation that is unfamiliar to you, that is not your home environment. So let's get into it. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so that you get notifications. So the first lesson we're going to get into is insults. You're going to learn when you travel that insults are just a matter of how you are interpreting what the other person is saying. And your interpretation is dependent on your culture and where you are. So you're going to realize that different places insult people differently. And once you interact with that and you notice that, your chances of getting offended quickly decrease. For example, there are some places where insults involve using profanity, and there are some places where when they insult you, they're more likely to mention cursing your future generations. In other places, the insults sound more like threats, like, oh, you're going to get struck by lightning, or this and this is going to happen to you, or I hope this and this happens to you. And there's places where they state some feature you have, and in those places, it's taken as an insult because bluntness is insulting. So, for example, if you take someone who comes from a culture where people use profanity, and that person insults someone who comes from a different culture where they don't use swear words, the person who's being insulted might not actually feel insulted. They're going to take the insult as an indication of the person who's speaking with them's intelligence. So they'll say, oh, this is an uneducated person, or this is a dumb person, because all they can use is swear words, right? And then you have someone who comes from a culture where they use threats or mystical threats, specifically like, I'm going to send lightning to strike you and your family. They're going to strike you down. Someone who comes from a culture where they don't believe in spiritual things will hear that type of insult and say, oh, that's fiction. Like, that's not going to happen. Like, who cares, right? And then you have someone else who comes from a culture where they will say an insult such as, I'm going to curse you and 18 generations to come. And if you say that to somebody else who's not familiar with that, they're going to think, well, I'm not going to be alive. Why would I care? Like, I'm not going to be alive. So once you meet different people and you see that they insult people differently, and your interpretation of what someone is saying is based on your experiences, your culture, and what's important to you, you will realize that you getting offended is actually a choice. There's a space in between you hearing something and you getting offended where there's choice. And that choice that you make is coming from your culture, your upbringing, and how you interpret what someone is saying. For the second lesson, let's talk about compliments. So the biggest thing I have noticed in my experience when I'm traveling is different places compliment certain things, and what they deem an acceptable compliment is different based on where you are. I have received compliments that, if I was in America, for example, could be considered harassment. The person who said it, one, did not have ill intentions. They were not trying to harass me in any way, they just met me. And two, sometimes it's a language barrier. If English is not someone's first language, when they compliment you, they might use certain words that for a native speaker, it sounds like, oh, this compliment seems off, but they are actually wholeheartedly complimenting you and it's coming from a good place. So from that experience, you learn one, not to put too much weight on compliments as well as insults, because you know that the way people process things is dependent on where they come from, who they are, how they communicate, what's acceptable in their language, what's not acceptable in their language, and how you interpret it is also dependent on those things. And so you actually learn grace within that gap between when you hear something and what you decide to interpret it as, or what meaning you decide to put on it. The third lesson you learn when you travel is behaviors mean different things in different places. This might seem obvious, but the reason why I want you to really pay attention to this is it will also train you to not always assume malintent when people do things, to be a more patient person, and to assume misunderstanding at first when something happens. Let's say you walk into a store and someone starts following you around. In some places, it means they think you're going to steal, especially if you're a person of color or you're Black. There are other countries where if you walk into the store and they start following you, it's not because they think you're going to steal. They already know you're not going to steal, because in those countries, the punishment for stealing is so bad, no one does it. They're following you because they're trying to get you to spend more money. So if they see you holding a moisturizer, they're going to say, oh, do you need any help? And you say, no, I'm fine. I was just looking at the moisturizers. And then they will come back a minute later holding another moisturizer, and they'll say, actually, this is the best quality, this is the best seller, and they're showing you the product with the highest price in the store. And then if you take that, they are gonna walk around with you and start suggesting things that you should get. Oh, now that you have a moisturizer, you should get a shampoo and a conditioner. This is the best seller. Everyone likes this. Everyone likes that. So they're not following you because they think you're going to steal. They just want you to buy more and spend more. And in some places, the way they assess performance in stores, especially of salespersons, is based on how many people you've helped. And so if they see you walk in and they help you throughout your shopping experience, they're going to write a bill with all the items that you bought and hand it to you, and you're going to take that to checkout together with the items you're buying. And so if they really thought you were going to steal, after writing you that bill, they usually let you walk to the checkout on your own. They wouldn't do that if they thought you were going to steal. So that's actually not what they're doing. So this is something you learn because having lived in America, right, and people follow you because they think you're going to steal, the first time I experienced this, that was my first thought. Like, these people think I'm going to steal. Like, why would I be in here? Why automatically think someone's going to steal? Especially when you're a tourist, it's like, well, why would you travel to another country to go steal, right? So I had to learn a lot about different places. Like, oh, they just want to get me to buy stuff. And so me being followed in the store is now annoying for a different reason. So it's the same behavior, different intent, different meaning, different purpose. When you experience these differences, it will actually teach you to learn to catch cultural norms quicker. Because when I walk into the store, my brain immediately checks, is someone following me, and processes, oh, what are they saying? Are they just following me and not saying anything? Are they following me and suggesting things for me to buy? Are they following me and offering to carry my things? Because I've also been in stores where they follow you and they won't let you carry your own things. They offer to take it out of your hand and then they put it in the basket and they hold the basket for you. There are places where they will do that because they think you're going to steal, but there are places where they do that because they don't want you to carry heavy stuff In fact, in some places, they'll actually ask you to then write a review. Like as you're walking out and you've checked out, you have your bags, and they'll be like, please, can you write a review and put my name on it? So this was actually a very interesting experience, like a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift I had was very similar to when I moved from Africa to America, where in Africa, no one ever followed me, no one ever questioned my integrity. And then moving to America and having that switch. So when I got to live in other places, I was like, oh, now I have to switch again to remembering that people can offer you help. People can follow you in stores, and it's not that they think anything negative of you, they just want to help you. So it's really interesting when you get to live in different places, especially if you're a person of color, you get to understand different things about different cultures. The next lesson, and this is a big one, you will learn that the structure of someone's language affects their perception around topics like shame, guilt, and relationships. And so this is really important if you're looking into intercultural, interracial relationships. There are certain cultures where they have a Bible of terms around the words shame and guilt. And therefore, in those cultures, people are more sensitive to shame and guilt, and people are less likely to make individualistic decisions. So it's always, what will people think? Will I be shamed for this? Sensitivity to guilt is very high. As a result, people tend to act in predictable ways. You also notice that they feel the emotion of guilt differently. And so, if let's say you come from a situation or culture or language where there's not that much emphasis on guilt, on shame, and you're in a relationship with someone who comes from a culture or language like that, they experience guilt differently. And you might say something in passing like, oh, this hurt me, and it's not a big deal for you, but you communicated. That person might spend a whole week worried about that one thing just because of how their language, their culture processes that emotion. So that's something to be aware of and to understand, especially when you go to places. The next lesson you will learn is how people see the sacredness of life, how people understand it. There are some places where people would never even think to pick up a gun and shoot someone. Like that in their minds is impossible. It's not something you would ever do, not something you'd even think of doing. Then there's some places where that is the first thought someone has if you upset them, or it's the first thought someone has if they're angry or scared or have any strong emotion. And so you actually also learn that because of that difference, certain places seem more callous towards their own bodies and their own life. And that leads to normalizing bad habits, harmful habits, things that hurt your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health. You can also see it in the laws of the different countries. A lot of things are more permissible when you're in environments where they don't hold as much weight on human life as they should. I'll give you a specific example. Like doing drugs is being callous towards yourself. There are lots of places where someone would never even think to try the drugs because they fear how it would affect their life. They see their life as sacred. They see it as this duty. They see it as this is a gift that has been bestowed upon them, that have been given to protect and to always make the right decision. Whereas in other places, people are just like, oh, it's rites of passage to try drugs. You're lying if you didn't try them at least once. So you see, like, there's a difference in how people view their life and what they normalize. It's actually coming from the difference in one place not really seeing the sacredness of the life that you have in your hands, in another place seeing the sacredness of it. This is why you have some countries where you can actually be sentenced to death for doing drugs, bringing drugs in. That's where that comes from. Someone from a different country will say, oh, that's harsh. But what you're seeing is a culture that puts your life on a certain level that another culture doesn't. So yeah, this is something like when you travel a lot, you actually realize, you know what, those places that seem strict, some of it is not the government's being controlling. It's actually just a culture of people who think human life is sacred and people shouldn't be doing things with their bodies or they shouldn't be doing things with their life that would hurt them. It will really change your perspective and you start seeing your life as more important. You start seeing the decisions you may have made that were callous towards your life, and you start seeing like people who do certain things or refuse to do certain things, like nothing's actually wrong with them. It's just the way their culture interprets the meaning of life. Like I met someone whilst I was traveling who invited me to participate in a dangerous sport, and I said I'm not doing it. And the person was like, every time I talk to you, you're like, I'm not doing this, I'm not trying this, I'm not trying this. You seem like you are just scared of trying all sorts of things. And I said, oh no, you're asking me to do dangerous things. Of course I'm gonna say no, just because I also grew up in such a culture where people view life as sacred. Like if you do something to hurt yourself, people don't think, oh, what's going on with you that is pushing you to do that. People think, why are you wasting your life? Why are you abusing life? Do you not realize that this is a gift you were given to protect? So that's the kind of culture I grew up in. And I have traveled to other places where people have that, and then I've traveled to places where people don't have that. And I've noticed that, oh, okay, so these are differences. So this is one big lesson that you learn. And I actually think it would be really good for people to travel to places where people have that, because it will actually make you value yourself more if you're coming from a place where people are more callous and there are these things that have been normalized that you should be doing that are actually not good for you. It will actually change your perspective. Like you say, oh wow, like my life is actually really important and I am actually blessed to be breathing. The next lesson I learned is what you're attracted to changes based on your exposure. So I'm going to share like personal experience, and I'm sure at least one person can relate to this. What I have actually noticed that when I travel to a place where there's people I didn't really grow up seeing, like an ethnic group that I did not grow up seeing, I don't necessarily feel attraction towards the men of that place because of that difference. However, after a certain amount of time, I can start to pick out the traits I usually like in people in them. So like I can start to see, I guess, the version in that place. And so my brain kind of adjusts to the difference. That actually made me realize that your attraction is your exposure when you were growing up, and it develops around that. So when I look at people that I've found attractive in different places, it's always been because they have a version of the traits, or especially physical, they have a version of their traits or a variation of those traits. So that would translate to having a type. And like it takes my brain a little bit of a while for me to find, I guess, my type within a place that I'm in. So this was something that I personally learned about myself. I'm pretty sure there's some people who have experienced this, where you go to one continent and it's like people will look completely different from you. Takes you some time, and then after a while you're like, oh, like that trait that I like in my people, this person has it. Or that trait that I like in my people, this person has it. Like I have a particular head shape that I like, and a friend actually pointed it out to me that, oh, all of these people have the same head shape, you have a type. And so this is something that I have noticed in myself, that if I travel, I'm like, oh, like I don't really feel any attraction at the moment. And then after a while, my brain sees someone who has that head shape. And I'm like, oh, okay, this person kind of looks good. So that was something I learned, that your attraction can change. What you're attracted to is based on exposure. And then your brain is just trying to understand. Mine takes me a little bit of time. But yeah, the next lesson I'll share with you, I'm always preaching this, especially to American women, Western women. When you travel to places where the culture is a lot stricter, you need to be careful, because the men in those cultures are looking to do things that their culture would not allow them to do. And they know that you would do them thinking, oh, this is normal because that's your culture. But for them, they are doing something they're not supposed to be doing, and they're using you. And usually they will pretend that they like you. So they will say that they love you. They will quote you as if you're actually in a relationship. But they know that they're just trying to do things that they wouldn't be able to normally do if they tried that on a woman from their culture. Especially when you're dealing with someone who comes from a culture where most relationships are arranged and that person wants to date you, you need to be careful, because they're most likely just trying to play with you. And I've actually noticed that American women are the biggest target of this. Having ran into people when I was traveling who either deduced that I was living in America or I've been there for a while, they don't try to hide it. And what worries me is, are they not aware that it's painfully obvious? Or is it that this actually works on people? Because why are they doing this? It would be good for you to be suspicious of anyone who rushes to tell you they love you, especially if they're from any of these strict cultures. I would actually never believe it. This is my personal approach. I never believe it when someone says, I love you, and they come from those cultures, because I know the person's family approving of you, how the community is approving of you matters a lot. And I just don't believe it. I don't believe it. If I'm not of that culture, I'm not of that religion, and I don't look like them, I just don't believe it. Because I have seen enough people get used to know that I would rather stick to people I know are not doing that. Like, at least someone with similar views from a similar place, there isn't that question of, is this someone who might just say, oh yeah, my parents have arranged a wife for me now. So from the perspective of not wanting to waste my time, not wanting to be part of someone's playtime, I don't advise. And here's another thing. Here's another quick way for you to protect yourself. Don't engage in premarital intimacy if you're in a relationship like that, because in those cultures, they don't do it. So they wait until they're married. You should do the same. Ask the guy, I want to follow your customs. I am not going to sleep with you. I'm not going to do A, B, C, D. They will leave you alone. They will actually leave you alone. So the whole point is, they want to benefit from someone who comes from a liberal culture. Like, if you tell them that I don't practice physical intimacy, like, I have a friend who basically told one guy, like, I don't practice physical intimacy. And then he said, I thought people from your country just give it up just like that. Like, that is actually very disrespectful. You can tell the stereotype and you can tell the reason behind why he approached her. In fact, right, there's some places where men and women don't shake hands. And the men of that culture, when they're targeting Americans, the first thing they would do is ask to shake your hand. You're not going to realize that they're testing your comfort with touch. So first, they're going to start by shaking your hand. Next time, they're going to be like, yeah, high five. Like, they're testing your comfort with physical touch. In their culture, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't ask to shake the woman's hand. They wouldn't ask to high five her. It's high time you understand as women, especially American women, I am emphasizing this, like you need to be careful because I actually see you get targeted a lot. Another lesson you learn is political correctness only exists in the US. Everywhere else, if let's say people are being racist or prejudiced or anything, they don't actually see anything wrong with what they're doing. So they don't try to hide it, and they will show the most extreme version of racism, bigotry you've ever seen. And they don't see anything wrong with it. Racism in America is bad, but at least people recognize that it's bad. Those that hide it or those that get hurt when they're called racist, they're actually showing that they're recognizing that is a bad thing. You shouldn't be doing it. But there are places where people, if they could, they would walk around saying, I am racist. I don't like this. I don't like that. There's also places where they will literally say on a job description, I'm looking for someone of this ethnicity, or I am not looking for someone of this ethnicity. Like, I don't want Africans can't do this job, for example. People from this country can't do this job. We only want people from this country. And when I say this, I'm not talking about companies that are asking for their local people who are trying to hire their local people. I have seen places where they say, I want to hire someone for this job, and then they name an ethnicity that is not their own. And they say only people who look like this or only people from this country should apply for this job. Political correctness does not exist, so that's just something you need to understand. This also affects other identities, it's not just race. So that's something you need to be aware of. The next lesson you learn is words mean different things. So for example, there's some places, some countries where when someone says sorry, they're not actually apologizing, they're just saying excuse me. And then there's some places where they differentiate between sorry and excuse me. So if someone from a place like that hears you saying sorry when you're saying excuse me, they'll think you're apologizing when you're not. There are languages where the word for sorry and excuse me is the same. So when they translate it into English, they might just say sorry. What they mean is excuse me. And someone else who speaks English would be like, why are you apologizing? Why are you apologizing? There's other words like okay and well that could be the exact same word. I've encountered people where their language, where the word for well and okay is the same. So sometimes they'll use well instead of okay, and it can sound off. It can sound like you're saying, well, that's obvious, and yet that's not the tone they're actually using. So this is something that is important to know, that if you notice something sounding off, maybe understand the language the person speaks. You might learn that they are using the word well, but it means something different in their head. So they think they're saying one thing when they're actually saying something else, and you're interpreting it differently because you speak another different language or you only speak English, and that means something totally different. So that was the 9 lessons that you learn from traveling. Next week, we're going to talk about sacred parts of your body. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so that you get notifications. My name is Chidom Pofu. I'm your personal emotional intelligence detective. Always keeping it real. See you next time.